Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to run through the 5 big mistakes breweries are likely to make throughout 2022 and hopefully open up a bit of discussion about how they can best navigate some of these issues and most importantly to find out what you, yes you, want to see from breweries on these subjects, since well it is you who will likely be affected. So please let us know in the comments below about what approach you'd like to see from your local brewers on any of the following 5 issues. So let's get right to it. Mistake number 1. Ignoring the cost of living crisis. Now, this is a big one. To be honest, I nearly left this one till the end, but you know what? Everyone needs to hear this, so here it is, big and upfront. The cost of living in the UK has risen by unprecedented levels in recent months and is expected to rise even more dramatically by the end of the year. This graph from the House of Commons Library shows where we're at now with the line on the left and where we're expected to go with the dots on the right-hand side. These estimates were before the Ukraine crisis. Before. So how badly now we're going to be screwed with everything that's happened as a result of that, well, it's hardly worth thinking about. But that's now the depressing bit over with. How will this affect breweries? Well, the obvious effect is that it will cause an increase in the cost of ingredients, energy, production, the cost of distribution. So, well, you've already guessed it, the price of beer is going to go up. And no, I didn't think that breweries wouldn't foresee this. It's a pretty obvious thing. But what they might ignore is how to handle the cost of living crisis as a whole, because continuing production of exactly the same beer and just lifting the price tag may seem rational, but can and will each brewery's regular customers, that's me and you, be able to or willing to continue purchasing their stock at the same rate as before with a new loftier price tag amongst a never-ending increase in costs throughout the rest of our lives? Well, I suspect the answer for many will be no, so a change of approach might be necessary for breweries to survive. It would also be worth remembering that beer is already somewhat significantly inflated than it was a couple of years ago, a potent blend of businesses needing to scoop back a loss of pub sales during and due to the pandemic, and a sharp rise in crop prices means beer is already, well, incredibly expensive compared to what it was just a couple of years ago. And how much more can the average consumer take, really, is my question. So now, really, right now is the time for breweries to get experimenting on their pilot kits, work out how to produce good beer and at an acceptable price. And I know you're shouting at me right now, Tom, we want great beer, not good beer. Well, this is a crisis.
This is a crisis. A large crisis. In fact, if you've got a moment, it's a 12-story crisis with a magnificent entrance hall, carpeting throughout, 24-hour porterage, and an enormous sign on the roof saying, "This is a large crisis."
And as such, for our day-to-day beer needs, good beer may just have to do for a little while. Many of us would argue that beer is somewhat of a necessity and not a luxury, but unfortunately, to be honest, many styles that we've become used to at a relatively acceptable price point will simply not be able to fall into that camp any longer. So what should breweries be doing to get around this? Well, I'll come back to that, since it just so happens that this isn't the only potential mistake that may affect our beer styles going forward. And on to mistake number 2. Social media. Now, this one is not limited to 2022. This has been an issue for years and will probably continue to be an issue for years, but I'm going to say it anyway. It needs pushing again. Many breweries simply do not do enough on social media. We are, for better or worse, in a situation now where social media can make or break a business, especially a small one, as many breweries, as you well know, are. Now, I understand why many breweries don't bother doing as such, because many have ongoing agreements with their local pubs, local distributors, and effectively that secures their required income on the majority of their output throughout the year, and it's kind of a not an easy approach, but it works, and I understand it works. And so I can see why they're a little bit reluctant to go all in on social media when that's more of a kind of a B2C, business to customer relationship, and ultimately sells a lot less volume of beer. And I have absolutely no doubt... You and me. No, not them. I have no doubt at all that breweries would like to blow up to be able to increase their yield, profits, capacity, their team, and everything else that goes with it. But the feeling I get from many of them is that they're really just waiting for one of their beers to be so good it just kind of happens off the back of that and on its own, which is a nice fairy tale, but unfortunately I think it's not very often the truth. The truth is, however, that many breweries produce beers that are as good, if not better, than a lot of the heavily hyped beers you see all over the internet. The difference being is the exposure and, more importantly, brand personality. According to an article by drinkripples.com, there are in excess of 9,000 active beverage influencers. That's a horrible word, influencer, which means the opportunity for exposure is massive. Now, that Drink Ripples article was published in early 2020, just before the pandemic, so really it should have been called influenza marketing. And it's not just a volume game, it's claimed that smaller craft breweries, whilst only having 25% of the number of active influencers compared to larger brands, receive more than 2.5 times the amount of engagement with their content, which means people are wanting and willing to engage with smaller breweries. So breweries just need to make it possible for people to do that, and then that growth just starts naturally from there. The proof of this argument for me really is in the pudding. A few weeks ago, I featured the same brewery twice in a week, sampling a number of their beers on each occasion and discussing my personal history with that brand. It wasn't a paid ad or a product placement. I have a legitimate interest and love for this brewery, and I was just happy that they'd interacted with me to the extent that allowed me to form kind of this narrative and the beers that go along with it. For me, it was just a bit of quality content that was a little different to what I normally do, but what I did not expect was that this led to a number of my audience going away and purchasing at least a few hundred quid's worth of beer over the next few days. And that is just the purchase that I've been told about. So, you know, keeping in mind how small my following is, that really just shows what is possible when a little more effort is done by a brewery to interact with influencers, even smaller channels. And that is my social media rant over. On to mistake number 3. Ease of purchase. What do I mean by that? Well, once we've cracked the first 2 issues of ensuring beer remains cost effective for the consumer and you've got enough people to hype about your beer on social media, people are going to want to buy beers, and well, you need to make it easy to do. Please, pretty please, just please make it easy. I can't stress this enough. The ease of purchase needs to be absolute. If the only way to buy your beer is through a third-party bottle shop with no PayPal checkout and a horrendous shipping cost, I'm sorry, I'm just probably not going to bother. That's ultimately the truth. Now, my background is in digital and online tech. I understand things like user interaction, especially around points of sale, usability, general psychology of design, all that stuff. So when it comes to trying to sell something digitally, I probably spend a lot more time thinking about this than most people do. And I should say to any small breweries out there, if you want some help in this department, come and talk to me. I'm happy to help people out, like advice, little bits of knowledge that I can give on to help with beer sales, because ultimately I'm interested in this industry succeeding. So yeah, come talk to me. Come say hi. Hello. And I think that it will have been easy for many breweries to become complacent with their online offerings during the pandemic because people simply had more time and interest in getting quality beer at home because they couldn't get it anywhere else. Now, competition from the pubs and bars is back, but people's habits haven't completely reversed. So spend that time to get it right and get it easy to make a purchase. And consider having an introductory pack, a variety pack of kind of your best offerings for newcomers, maybe priced slightly more competitively than your normal beer, just to get people in the door, and at the very least with as little shipping cost as possible, if you can do it. I appreciate costs are high. It's a very difficult line to toe, but I mean, if you can get someone in, they're probably going to come back. Point number 4, and I think a lot of my regular viewers will probably be bored of me waffling on about this one now, but I'm going to do it anyway because it is important. You know it, I know it, we all know it. Breweries can't help themselves but bring out a new IPA every few weeks. And I get it. IPAs sell because the general public now know what they are. And the problem here is multifaceted. Without all of the chaos in the world right now, I still would have included this in my list because for the last 6+ months, almost every conversation I've had with beer lovers around the world about IPAs has either included the phrases, there's too many, we want more variety, and oddly enough, and more so in the UK, we'd like to see some more craft bitters, porters, milds, whatever, which is, well, interesting. And whilst a lot of these thoughts may be centric to the time of year, there's also been a huge increase in discussion over the wanting of a return to real lager. Now, a quick beer history lesson for you. In the UK at least, due to the beer industry's inability to pry themselves away from everyday and mundane world of old school best bitters, bland pales, and so on, in the late 90s, many beer drinkers opted instead for European imported lagers and pilsners. Understandably. However, at this time, this largely meant macro producers, and inevitably the prices slowly crept up, the quality went down, and then we ended up with the craft revolution as a result of that, which basically branded bland, tasteless lagers as redundant and all hail to the IPA. People are now, of course, realising that lagers don't have to be bad, it's just what we were used to for the last 20 years, and don't forget, history does have a tendency to repeat itself. So if breweries don't start to rotate those styles and dictate the change themselves, we could well end up back in the year 2000, where Euro lager imports reign supreme because everyone's grown bored of local ale, all for being too samey. Yes, there's more flavour now, but the same is still the same. Now, of course, cut all this in with the cost of living crisis we talked about earlier, and we're in for a really difficult time. IPAs are simply more expensive to produce, there's a larger number of and often imported hops among other ingredients, and adding a potential IPA cost crisis into the mix with everything else we've got going on here really just shouts one thing to me, which is breweries, you really do not need to put all your eggs in one basket with the IPA. Yes, I know they sell right now, but unless you become competent at a few other styles or easy drinking everyday beers, you might get a problem. And as an aside, also stop using Citra. There's no socio-economic reason for this, I just think it's gross. And finally, number 5. I think this is one that probably everyone was kind of expecting to come up in one way or another, and this is the Russian Imperial Stout. I think you know where I'm going with this, but just in case you don't, rename the damn thing. Now, this is not a virtue signaling exercise or a wish to erase anything to do with Russia whatsoever. This, yet again, is potentially history repeating itself. Ever wondered where the word Alsatian came from? Well, according to everyone's favourite source of accurate information, Wikipedia, at the end of the First World War, it was believed that the inclusion of the word German would harm the breed's popularity due to the anti-German sentiment of the era. The breed was officially named by the UK Kennel Club as the Alsatian Wolf Dog after the French region of Alsace bordering Germany. Alsace, Alsatian, you get it. So this was a purely British invention, and the name has long been dropped and reverted back to German Shepherd. I can see something similar happening in beer. So this is really just a base warning about people's subconscious. Given the choice right now between an Imperial Stout and a Russian Imperial Stout, which do you think people are going to go for? Of course, nothing is for certain, but I think it's a worthy renaming exercise just to err on the side of caution. And that is it. Those are my 5 big mistakes breweries could make in 2022, and hopefully this video helps prevent at least one small brewery mistakenly dropping the ball on one of those topics. Is there anything I've missed? Are there another 5 points? Do we need another video? Have I missed a key critical component to any of these topics? Comments below as always. And as always, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like it if you haven't already subscribed, if you will be so kind, and I'll catch you next time. Cheers.